Welcome to Mediation and Restorative Justice Training. This training is created to help you understand your conflict style, use it in ways to manage situation in your leadership roles, and influence your living environment with skills of de-escalation. I'm Charity Tripp, and I've led this training at many conferences, and I hope you enjoy. The learning outcomes of this presentation include understanding how privilege impacts how conflict is handled in the workplace, and some resources and skills on initiating the conversation while using restorative justice practices. Conflict is a way of handling harm. There are positive and negative ways to do this. With the practice of restorative justice, you can remove blame and help students take ownership for their actions. Students can see what the harm was and how they can restore that relationship with others. In conduct, this is used. Instead of giving sanctions like a fine, we would give them something that has to do with the harm that was created. For an example, if a student tore down a bulletin board while they were drunk, they might be told that they need to help the RA put that bulletin board back up. They might even have to do it on healthy drinking habits. It allows the person who is harmed say what is needed from them to restore the relationship. In this case, the RA might say that what is needed is them to help them do the bulletin board. What are some things we think about when dealing with conflict, or things that people are feeling? Anger, problems, miscommunication, frustration, cultural differences, mad, annoyed. What do these have in common? They're all negative. Why do these people have conflict? Different needs, different goals, drives, wishes, different ideologies, values, beliefs, different customs, different norms, limited resources, differentiated power in relationships, concern with self, different interpretations, a violation of personal boundaries, old wounds that were never healed. It's always important to change your mindset on conflict. Conflict can better a relationship. I always say that residents I have the most conflict with are the ones that I have the best relationship with. Your view on conflict needs to be revamped, enlightened. It can help you change and make peace. Where does this conflict happen? It happens anywhere a relationship exists. It's super common and normal. Just because it's normal doesn't always mean it's helpful. Knowing your conflict style is extremely important. It may take a while to understand what your pattern is once we get into conflict. We try to resolve it using the same strategy every time, and I mean every time. If I had understood this earlier, I know I would have been much more aware of my conflict resolution style. I was going to negatively impact teams that I led. I would have done some skill building much earlier. I remember one day I was running a staff meeting. Two of my staff members were having a strong discussion. Because my first stage of conflict resolution is to accommodate, I tried to smooth it over. I underestimated the extent of the conflict. This meant I tried to move on too soon. The result was that these two staff members went into quite severe conflict. It then cost me a lot of time and stress trying to resolve. I had been more skilled in dealing with the conflict and chose to not move into accommodation style of the resolution, I could have saved others and myself in a heap of pain. So you should ask yourself, do you know your conflict resolution style? In the 1970s, Kenneth Thomas and Ralph Kilman identified 5 main styles of dealing with conflict that vary in degrees of cooperating and assertiveness. They argued that people typically have a preferred conflict resolution style. However, it's also noted that different styles were often used in different situations. They developed the Thomas-Kilman conflict mode instrument, which helps you identify the style that you tend to lean towards when conflict arises. The style you lean towards depends on if it's the calm or the storm. There are certain responses in the calm and in the storm. The storm is when there's an immediate, and the calm is when you have time to think about the situation. For an example, if you have a scheduled meeting with a student versus when you walk into a physical altercation. Once you understand the different styles, you can use them to think about the most appropriate approach, or a mixture of approaches for the situation that you're in. You can also think about your own instinctive approach and learn how you need to change this if it's necessary. Ideally, you can adopt to an approach that meets the situation, resolves the problem, and respects people's legitimate interests and mends damage in working with relationships. The first conflict style we'll talk about is avoidance. People tending towards this style seek to evade the conflict entirely. This style is typically delegated by decisions, accepting default decisions, and not wanting to hurt anyone's feelings. It can be appropriate when victory is impossible, when the controversy is trivial, or when someone else is in a better position to solve the problem. However, in many situations, this is a weak and ineffective approach to take. Accommodation. This style indicates the willingness to meet your needs of others at the expense of your own interests and needs. The accommodator often knows when to give in to others, but can be persuaded in a position even when it's not warranted. This person is not assertive and is highly cooperative. Accommodation is appropriate when issues matter more than the other party, when peace is more valuable than winning, or when you want to be in a position to collect on this favor that you gave. However, people may not return favors, and overall, this approach is unlikely to give the best outcomes. Competitive. People who tend towards this competitive style take a firm stand, and they know what they want. They usually operate in a position of power, drawn on things like position, rank, expertise, and persuasive ability. This style can be useful when there's an emergency and decisions need to be made fast, when the decision is unpopular, or when defending against someone who is trying to exploit the situation selfishly. However, it can leave people feeling bruised, unsatisfied, and resentful when used in a less urgent situation. Compromising. People who prefer compromising style try to find a solution that will at least partially satisfy everyone. Everyone is expected to give up something, and the compromiser, him or herself, also expects to relinquish something. Compromise is useful when the cost of conflict is higher than the cost of losing ground, when equal strength opponents are at a standstill, and when there is a deadline looming. And the fifth style is collaborative. People tending towards the collaborative style try to meet the needs of all people involved. These people can be highly assertive, and unlike the competitor, they cooperate effectively and acknowledge that everyone is important. This style is useful when they need to bring together a variety of viewpoints to get the best solution, when there have been previous conflicts in groups, or when the situation is too important for a simple trade-off. There is no correct solution. Different ones of these can be used during different times. Not one is always better than the other. After all, the reason that everyone has their own problem is because everyone sees something in different side. Now, how do you apply this at CSU Pueblo? You're expected to use this beyond your role in student housing. Disputes between students or colleagues, policy violations, in your classrooms, and even in student leaderships. You will get in conflict with teammates, students, faculty members, and beyond. Before you start a mediation process, you always want to meet with your pro staff. They'll guide you on how to navigate this conversation and make sure you're comfortable leading the process. The first official step is to meet with the students individually. This is to get their side of the story. You don't want to say things like, "Sarah told me this, is that true?" What the other student told you should not be addressed in a way that shares what they said. However, you could ask, how do you think that made Sarah feel? The next step is to meet with the students together, using restorative practices to find a solution that both students agree on. This might take some time. Once a solution is decided on, there's an action plan. This is the how. How will the solution be done? And what happens if it's not done? Make sure that you have your residents try it for 2 weeks. Check on them. Don't check on them at the end of 2 weeks. Check on them constantly. It's possible that the agreed on solution is not changing the problem. If they are not at a good point, they can request a roommate change through your area coordinator. Knowing when to refer up to your supervisor is important. We do not expect you to handle all mediations alone. Your supervisor can always step in, even if it means you're present. There are many helpful tips in facilitating a mediation. You always want to have mediations in a mutual place. Not all mediations are between your roommates. Make the place that both students are comfortable and it's private. Most classrooms and conference rooms are safe places. Make sure you get the ground rules out. You want to make sure that they know that you don't expect them to talk over one another and that talking down to each other is not tolerated. The point is to share that what the person is feeling and to come to a solution. Use paraphrasing. This is helpful in clarifying details. A good way to do this is through active listening. You can say things like, "I'm hearing you say that your feelings were hurt when..." The last thing to remember is to press the use of I statements. The students should be using them to make sure that they're talking to one another and not blaming one another. "I got my feelings hurt because it made me feel like my opinion didn't matter," is an I statement versus, "You hurt my feelings when you did this because you clearly don't care about my opinion." That's a blaming sentence. Help them refocus, paraphrase it, and use I statements if you need to. By using these practices and tips in your mediation, you should allow the person who caused the harm to share what they did, why they did it, apologize, and how the harm can be repaired. This should lead to those feeling harmed having their questions answered and feeling confident moving forward. There has been research on these techniques that proves that this leads to a stronger sense of belonging, a reduced number of conflict, and an increase in the students' ability to hold themselves accountable. It's important that students who go through this mediation process learn the steps. That way they're able to use it and practice it in their own world as they run into conflict. Now it's your turn. We'll practice this tonight. Take some notes. You got this. It's okay to go into mediations with questions prepared.